Hey guys, Datix here. Can you have a full team of clone troopers in Star Wars Zero Company? This is easily the most common question I've been asked since the game has been revealed. Well, thanks to a recent developer Q&A on Discord, we finally have the answer, not just to that question, but to dozens of others that the community have been asking. Some of the answers were exactly what I suspected, others genuinely surprised me. So let's jump straight in. Operators in Zero Company have access to clone armor cosmetics with the ability to customize their armor from the start. Bonus, clone trooper helmets even provide voice modulation to characters. You'll be able to unlock clone troopers after a certain point in the story, allowing you to have a full team of clone troopers. This lines up almost perfectly with what I suspected. It sounds like clone troopers won't simply appear from the beginning. Instead, you'll most likely unlock some form of clone recruitment facility, much like the building being used to recruit astromechs. Until then, you can still dress your custom operators in full clone armor, complete with the iconic voice modulation from the helmets. So even early on, you're able to create your own clone-inspired squad. Once clone recruitment unlocks though, that's where things get really interesting. Outside of story missions, you'll be able to field an entire squad of genuine clone troopers. During the story missions, Hawks is still mandatory, but even Hawks can wear clone armor. So if your dream is to roleplay your own Republic Special Forces unit, I'd say Bit Reactor has absolutely delivered. Even Jedi Master Sifo Dyas would approve. How many hours will the game be? Depending on your difficulty level and experience with the strategy genre, we estimate around 30 to 40 hours for the average player to complete the main story campaign. Honestly, I think this is a really healthy length. 30 to 40 hours is enough time to tell a meaningful campaign without dragging things out, and strategy games like this tend to have enormous replay value anyway. You'll finish one campaign, immediately start wondering what would have happened if you built a completely different squad, lost different operators or made different strategic decisions, and before you know it, you put in another 40 hours. If Bit Reactor nails the tactical gameplay, I don't think many people will stop after a single playthrough. Will there be any additional microtransactions? No, we don't have any plans for monetization or microtransactions at this time. I want to get this one out of the way early because it's one of the biggest concerns people have whenever a modern strategy game gets announced. At least for now, it sounds like Bit Reactor simply wants to ship a complete game. That means we can spend less time worrying about battle passes and premium currencies, and more time talking about whether Zero Company actually lives up to its potential. Is Hawks only required to be deployed for story-related missions, or can we not deploy him at all if we wanted? Hawks is required on story missions, but for skirmish missions, players are welcome to bring any combination of operators they want. This is another answer I think people will be really happy with. It means your custom squad isn't constantly tied to Hawks. If you want to run an all-clone squad, a squad of astromechs, or just experiment with different team compositions, you absolutely can. That said, I imagine most players will still take Hawks into as many missions as possible. He's mandatory throughout the campaign, so investing in him is probably one of the smartest long-term decisions you can make. The only downside, if Hawk dies or suffers 3 injuries, is he out as a unit? Does the mission restart, or is it a game over? Hawks is your main playable character, so it's an automatic mission failure if Hawks dies in combat, and you'll need to restart the mission. This clears up one of the biggest questions surrounding the injury system. Regular operators, when reduced to 0 HP, can be incapacitated. They'll suffer an injury and eventually die permanently if they gather 3 of them at once. These injuries can persist through missions unless healed. If you're playing on hard, 0 HP means permadeath instantly. Hawks works differently. The moment he reaches 0 health, the mission immediately ends and you're forced to retreat. Narratively, that makes perfect sense. The story can't exactly continue without your main character. It also means you're naturally encouraged to build your squad around protecting Hawks or Hawks becoming incredibly powerful, even if that means occasionally taking fewer risks than you otherwise would. For clone customization, will there be more unique types of armor and helmets like the ARF, Airborne, Commando, and so on? What are options that will be there for armor patterns? Our team here at Bit Reactor felt it was important to give players the option to have fun with character customization. We think you'll be very happy with the selection of paint jobs and patterns we have for helmets, armor, and more for the clone trooper customization. They're obviously being careful not to spoil anything before launch, but I think there's still something interesting hidden in this answer. Rather than promising every single clone variant that's ever appeared across the Clone Wars, they're talking about variety through paint jobs, patterns, and cosmetic options. To me, that suggests they're focusing on giving players enough tools to build their own identity, rather than trying to recreate every canon legion one-to-one. Personally, I think that's the right approach, and let's be honest, if there are still clone variants people desperately want that aren't included, the modding community will probably take care of that eventually. Which brings us to the next question: will the game have modding support? If so, to what extent would it be allowed? We have a lot of respect for the modding community, but there is no official mod support plan for Star Wars Zero Company. This isn't the answer that many people were hoping for, but it's good to finally have confirmation. Official mod support would have been fantastic, especially for a game with this much replayability. That said, modders will find a way. The lack of official tools never stops mods from happening, it usually just means they'll take a little longer to arrive. If I had to guess, this is probably less of a technical limitation and more of a licensing one. Disney likes to keep a close eye on how much Star Wars is distributed and modified. Either way, I wouldn't be surprised if, 6 months after launch, we're already seeing new species, armor sets and custom campaigns created by the community. With the option to customize Hawks and seeing them appear in cutscenes through the trailers, it seems like the game uses real-time rendered cinematics instead of pre-rendered ones. Are most cutscenes rendered in real time? Most of the cutscenes in-game are rendered in real time, but there are a few minor exceptions where we use pre-rendered cinematics. It was important to our team for players to see the characters they've customized reflected through their gameplay experience. This is fantastic news, and I honestly think it was the right call. There's not much point spending time creating your squad, tweaking their appearance and giving them their own identity if every cinematic suddenly swaps them out for generic default characters. Real-time cinematics means the people you spend hours building actually become the stars of your story. It makes your squad feel personal, which also means my horrifically ugly Hawks is going to appear in every major cutscene. It's a decision that I'll have to live with. What is the operator limit at HQ? Does it increase as the game progresses or remain static? The current operator limit is 20, but players will start with a maximum of 7 operators. This limit can be increased through new upgrades at the den, story progression, and as new authored operators join the squad. Just to clarify, this isn't your mission squad size. It's simply the number of operators you have back at the den at any one time. Custom recruits, clone troopers, astromechs, and the full authored story companions all count towards that total. 20 actually feels fairly generous when you consider how the game works. Some operators will be recovering from injuries, others can be sent away on operations, some might simply not be the right fit for your current mission. The game clearly expects you to maintain an actual roster rather than relying on the same 4 characters for the entire campaign. That's a very Xcom philosophy, and I think it's the right one. Which naturally brings us to squad size. Is the squad limit capped at 4 operators? The standard squad limit can go up to 4 operators, but players will have the opportunity to control additional characters during certain missions. Unlike most XCOM games, it doesn't sound like you'll be researching larger squad sizes later in the campaign. 4 operators seems to be the standard limit from beginning to end. Initially, I wasn't sure how I felt about that, but the more gameplay we've seen, the more I understand the decision. Each operator has considerably more abilities than your average XCOM soldier. They're constantly interacting through bond abilities, and Advantage encourages chaining powerful skills together. Keeping squads at 4 probably helps preserve each character's identity instead of turning every encounter into an 8-unit traffic jam. That said, I'm definitely intrigued by these additional characters. Whether that's temporary allies, story companions, vehicles, or perhaps someone like Anakin Skywalker during certain missions. I'm very interested to see how BitReactor handles those moments. Can you tell us a little more about the variety in weapons and gear we can outfit our operators with? Players will have a lot to discover once Star Wars Zero Company is released, but there is a deep well of equipable weapons and utilities for you to experiment with and customize as you progress through the game. We have 4 weapon classes, along with 4 to 6 cosmetic models you can select from within each class. This confirms what many of us already suspected: weapons aren't simply cosmetic, they're part of your build. We've already seen rifles, long arms, pistols, and repeaters, but each weapon can also be upgraded, modified, and visually customized. That means the same rifle might perform very differently depending on who's carrying it, which abilities they've unlocked, and how you've specialized them. It's another layer of player expression that goes beyond simply choosing a class. And if you watch my previous breakdown, you'll know some of these weapon combinations already look incredibly powerful. Now let's talk about the strategic layer. How are actions limited on the strategic map? It was mentioned that time only advances after combat missions. Does that mean we're free to do everything else? You will have a certain amount of intel that you can spend to conduct operations at the galaxy map between each mission. These can expire, but you'll have story critical missions that become obligatory after a certain point in the game. Each operation costs various amounts of intel, so we encourage you to choose wisely depending on your playstyle and gameplay interests. This answer actually explains quite a lot about how the campaign is structured. When you complete combat missions, you'll earn intel. That intel then becomes your currency on the strategic map. You'll spend it launching non-combat operations across the galaxy, spending spare operators on assignments and collecting resources that strengthen Zero Company. The catch? You won't have enough intel to do everything. Some operations will expire. Some threats will grow if you ignore them. Others might reward gear that's perfect for your current squad. So every decision comes with an opportunity cost. Much like the best strategy games, you're constantly deciding which problems you can afford to solve and which ones you'll simply have to live with. That's exactly the kind of pressure that makes campaigns memorable. It's not just about winning battles, it's about choosing which battles matter the most. It seems from everything we've been told that the Jedi Padawan class is tied to Talria herself, but what happens if Talria dies? Are we able to recruit more Jedi Padawans, or is she the only one? Talria is the only Jedi Padawan class operator in Star Wars Zero Company. Be careful that nothing unfortunate happens to her. It's now confirmed that Talria is the only Jedi you'll be able to recruit. Personally, I think that's a deliberate design decision. If players could simply recruit endless Jedi, they will quickly become the obvious choice and overshadow the rest of the roster. By making Talria unique, Bit Reactor ensures that every class remains valuable and that losing her actually carries weight. She's fully authored, fully voiced, and has her own story to tell. But just like the rest of your squad, she isn't immortal. If she dies, she's gone. So if force push, force pull, and reflecting blaster fire becomes key parts of your strategy, you'll need to protect her. She's not just another operator, she's irreplaceable. Will there be enemy vehicles or larger droids like dwarf spider droids that we will have to fight during missions? We can't share specifics just yet, but there will be missions that involve some heavy machinery. I think they've basically answered this without actually answering it. I'd be amazed if we didn't end up fighting large droids, vehicles, or boss-style enemies throughout the campaign. Most strategy games gradually introduce tougher enemy types as you progress to keep encounters fresh, and everything we've seen so far suggests Zero Company is following that same philosophy. So I fully expect Bit Reactor still has a few surprises they're keeping under wraps. How will having no fog of war avoid players simply bringing 4 snipers and shooting everything from across the map? Snipers are a viable strategy, and we won't dissuade players from building a whole squad to address certain scenarios. We've seen the evolution of strategy games over our careers, and it was extremely important to us to offer diverse strategies and flexibility in how someone wants to play. With that in mind, even though snipers have long range, it doesn't mean they can always see the targets they want to shoot. A whole team of snipers might end up having a lower rate of kills, which could be something you want to keep in mind when planning out your team. This answer actually tells us a lot about Bit Reactor's design philosophy. Instead of nerfing snipers until nobody wants to use them, they've built systems that naturally encourage bringing a more balanced squad. Take the Scoundrel for example. We've already seen Sabotage, which is a free action that detonates environmental explosives before combat has really even begun. It generates advantage, removes cover, displaces enemies, and can completely reshape the battlefield before anyone fires a shot or even during it. Then you've got Astromechs. They can scan the battlefield to reveal hidden enemies and improve your squad's accuracy before the engagement starts as well. Suddenly, bringing 4 snipers doesn't seem nearly as appealing. Not because snipers became weaker, but because every other class offers something equally valuable. That's exactly how I like my strategy games to be balanced. Don't punish players for finding strong strategies. Create a lot of interesting and viable choices. If you build enough depth into every class, naturally players start experimenting instead of feeling forced into one optimal squad. To me, that's much healthier game design than simply adding arbitrary restrictions. Will there be any weather effects that affect visibility or combat efficiency? The weather effects during combat are purely cosmetic and will not affect the squad's visibility or efficiency. Honestly, I'm perfectly happy with that. Not every mechanic needs another gameplay system attached to it. Sometimes rain should just make a battlefield look incredible. Sometimes snow should simply add more atmosphere. Keeping weather cosmetic means missions remain readable and predictable while still looking cinematic. I think Bit Reactor showed a lot of restraint here, and I actually appreciate that. Do outfits impact your character's gameplay? You have to look good to play good, but outfits do not impact gameplay. Again, exactly the right decision. The moment one armor set provides better stats than another, cosmetics stop being cosmetics. Players stop choosing what they think looks cool and instead start chasing whatever happens to be mathematically optimal. Keeping appearance completely separate from gameplay means everyone gets to build the squad they actually want. Fashion wins, as it should. But not all fashion. Will there be ARC Trooper armor? The ARC Trooper armor set is only part of the Grand Army of the Republic cosmetic pack included with the deluxe edition, but will have a ton of other cosmetic options available out of the gate for players. This is pretty much what I expected. Deluxe editions almost always include additional cosmetic content these days. As long as it stays cosmetic, I don't really have an issue with it. Nobody enjoys gameplay advantages being locked behind more expensive editions, but if it's just armor skins, that's a much easier pill to swallow. Speaking of armor, will we get Beskar armor for our operatives? If so, can we customize it? You will have a ton of cosmetic options for armor in the game, but only Cly can wear the Mandalorian armor. That's an interesting answer. I'm not sure if it outright confirms Cly is the only Mandalorian style operator in the game, but it certainly points in that direction. Much like Talria being the only Jedi, it feels like Bit Reactor wants certain iconic Star Wars archetypes to remain unique instead of becoming something every custom operator can copy. Personally, I don't mind that. Having a few special characters helps preserve their identity throughout the campaign instead of making everyone feel interchangeable. Will there be a New Game Plus at launch? We won't have a New Game Plus, but players will unlock certain customization options on subsequent playthroughs. I actually understand this decision. Games like Zero Company are built around progression. Starting a fresh campaign with fully upgraded operators would either trivialize the early game or require Bit Reactor to rebalance every mission from the ground up. Instead, they're rewarding repeat playthroughs with additional customization. That encourages replayability without breaking the carefully designed progression curve. And honestly, I think that's probably the cleaner solution. What will the playstyle of the three enemy factions be like? Are there any specific strategies players should consider against each? Our three announced enemy factions all have distinct aspects that challenge players to change up their tactical approach. For the Separatist Alliance and their droids, players might want to have ion weapons to handily dispose of them. Infinite Coil will have various abilities and players will need to consider who to kill and in what order. And Outlaws can overwhelm you with numbers. This is exactly what I wanted to hear. The best strategy games don't just give you different looking enemies, they force you to think differently depending on who you're fighting. Against the Separatists, iron weapons immediately become more valuable. Against Outlaws who fight through sheer numbers, you'll probably want crowd control, explosives, and area of effect damage. Suddenly your heavy with rockets and grenades becomes much more attractive. Infinite Coil sounds completely different again. They seem designed around target priority, identifying which enemy is the biggest threat and eliminating them before their abilities spiral out of control. Assuming Bit Reactor balances this well, your squad shouldn't remain static throughout the campaign. You'll constantly be adapting your loadout depending on who you're expecting to fight. That's exactly what you want from a tactical strategy game. Within each faction, we'll almost certainly see multiple enemy types that demand different approaches yet again. And remember, those are only the three factions they've announced. I wouldn't be surprised if Bit Reactor is keeping a few late game surprises hidden. How early into the game can we make a full Astromech team? Astromechs are unlocked pretty early in the game, and you can build a full team as soon as you can recruit Astromechs. Hawks is required for story missions, but additional slots can be filled with Astromechs at all times. We want to see all the Astromech teams. We've actually known this for a little while now, but it's still great to have it confirmed again. Bit Reactor clearly wants players experimenting. Will a full Astromech squad be the strongest strategy? Probably not. Everything we've seen suggests they're more support orientated than outright damage dealers, but the important thing is that it's viable. Some people are going to roleplay a Republic repair crew, others are going to create an army of clone troopers, some lunatics will probably attempt entire campaigns using nothing but Astromechs, and honestly, I can't wait to watch that happen. Can we recruit B1 battle droids or other Separatist droids as operators, etc.? You cannot recruit Separatist droids as operators in Star Wars Zero Company. It was fun reading how much thought you put into how A separatist droid could be recruited though. You've got to admire the community's optimism. People were genuinely trying to convince the developers to add an entirely new recruitment system just weeks before launch. Unfortunately, no, separatist droids won't be joining your squad. Although I have to admit, a campaign where you slowly steal and reprogram enemy droids would have been pretty cool. Maybe that's a job for the modders. Will Zero Company have access to specialized call-ins? For example, can we call in an LAAT support during missions? There will not be any specialized call-ins. Hawks has to make it out or it's an automatic mission fail. We recommend taking your time with team planning to build a squad that supports your playstyle for mission success. Once you deploy, you're on your own. Zero Company is clearly operating outside the normal military chain of command. There aren't going to be convenient airstrikes or emergency reinforcements arriving to rescue you halfway through a difficult mission. Your success depends almost entirely on the squad you've assembled before deployment. No one really knows or cares about you. Personally, I like it like that. It puts more emphasis on planning and preparation and building a team that works well together rather than relying on a panic button when things go wrong. Will our characters have nicknames like they do in XCOM 2? Nicknames aren't acquired like in XCOM 2, but players can fully customize recruited operator names and backstories when you customize your character. A little disappointing. I've always enjoyed watching soldiers earn their nicknames after surviving impossible missions. It gave them a bit of history. That being said, having complete control over names and backstories means that players can still create exactly the squad they want. And knowing this community, half of you are probably going to recreate your favorite clones anyway. Are there certain species or factions naturally better with certain weapon types? There are no certain species or factions with better weapon proficiencies because we don't want players to feel they have to pick a specific species to optimize their gameplay. Again, this is absolutely the right decision. Species should be a role-playing choice, not a balanced choice. If you want to build a squad entirely made up of humans, Twi'leks, or any combination you like, you should be able to do that without feeling like you've handicapped yourself. The Force won't judge you if you're a space racist, and thankfully, neither does Bit Reactor. What are some examples of standout abilities or strategies the developers particularly enjoy? Force pulling or pushing enemies into an ally's overwatch. Bull rushing enemies off cliffs or into hazards for instant kills. Stacking multiple overwatch zones around reinforcement locations, using gunslingers to chain action points after kills, calling for backup and having bonded allies all fire together, destroying cover with rockets and explosives, turning astromechs into miniature weapon platforms with firebombs, thermal detonators and droid poppers, using sabotage to detonate environmental explosives, scanning cloaked enemies with astromechs, and having the high ground. There's a lot to unpack there. The biggest takeaway for me isn't actually any single ability, it's how interactive the battlefield appears to be. Positioning seems absolutely critical. You're not just looking for better accuracy anymore, you're looking for cliffs, explosive barrels, steam vents, environmental hazards, enemies you can shove into kill zones. Everything on the battlefield looks like it can become another weapon if you plan ahead. That kind of emergent gameplay is exactly what makes strategy games endlessly replayable. Finally, will Star Wars Zero Company release on Nintendo Switch or Steam Deck? We're continuing to develop and optimize the game for PC, PlayStation 5, and Xbox Series X and S. If we have any news to share on this front, we will let everyone know. So they aren't confirming anything, but they aren't shutting the door either. Personally, I'd love to see Steam Deck support. Turn-based strategy games are almost perfect for handhelds. One more mission quickly turns into 3 more missions while you're sitting on the couch. XCOM 2 remains one of my favorite Steam Deck games, and Zero Company feels exactly the sort of experience that would thrive there as well. Hopefully it's something they're able to make happen after launch. So that's everything we learned from the developer Q&A. Honestly, I came away even more excited than I was beforehand. Not because every answer was perfect, there were definitely a few things I would still love to see, but because the answers consistently point towards a team that seem to understand what makes strategy games so replayable in the first place and seem to respect the Star Wars IP. I'm seeing meaningful squad building, interesting tactical decisions, player freedom, and enough customization to make your campaign feel like your own. Now, I want to hear from you. Which answer surprised you the most? Is there anything you hope the developers would answer that they still haven't? Let me know below. And if you're as excited for Zero Company as I am, make sure you subscribe because I got plenty more exclusive coverage on the way. Until next time, ciao friends.